Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. In this video, we are going to do some box making. And I'm going to show you how to make a wood hinge business card box. Now, this makes a great gift. Perfect way to hold on to your business cards. Has a wooden hinge, as I mentioned. Very simple joinery, easy to do. Get your pen and paper, and let's get busy. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. I was first introduced to the concept of the wood hinge from Dale Nish back in the early 80s when I attended Brigham Young University. In fact, I was thrilled with it. Took it a long way. Made, I think it's close to 2,000 of these. And in our lean years of going to university, I could turn scraps that would normally be tossed into the garbage if you were to actually look at the size of the pieces. Yet I could turn into a box that we would sell through galleries that would actually kept us alive for a number of years. This is a business card box. This is the one we're going to focus on today. And I'm not going to go through all of the processes in detail, but I am going to cover it so that you'll see it from start to finish. And you'll be able to hopefully be able to duplicate it. We are going to go into the specifics of various procedures in future videos, but I've got a simplified joint I'm going to show you. You're going to see us do the wood hinge and the total construction, all the details, including the measurements. So if you want to make something like this for Christmas, you'll be able to. Here's a great example of how nicely you can hide that hinge if you choose your woods properly. Just a really cool way of doing this. Anyway, I'm going to talk about which woods we're going to use. I'm going to give you some dimensions, so you're going to want to write this stuff down if you plan to do it. Let's get going. First decision we have to make is what woods are we going to use. And I would vote for using contrasting woods. The reason is it makes the joint stand out and it's catchy. This is a piece of bird's eye and gaboon ebony. This one is a piece of Mexican rosewood and ebony and the bird's eye. This is tulip wood and bird's eye. It's a piece of Australian lacewood and bird's eye. It's a piece of Macassar ebony and bird's eye. This is Macassar ebony as well, and quilted maple, and that one is bird's eye and gaboon ebony. Now, I'll just give you my reasoning for this. Sometimes the exotics don't glue very well, and you want a really good glue joint between the pieces of the dowel and the back and the lid. So that's the reason why I typically use maple on those three pieces. And three pieces, you're actually talking more than that, but the dowel is made out of the same wood as the back and the lid. So my suggestion would be keep this woods that will actually perform well in terms of gluing. Now what I chose to use on this one, for the front and back, I'm going to use bird's eye, and on the ends I'm going to use a piece of quilted, or not quilted, but fiddleback walnut. I think it'll really turn out nice. You can use anything you want here. I would suggest if maybe in your first box or two, use something simple, just to get the hang of it and figure out the actual specifics of it. When you start making these, you realize how precise you have to be, and sometimes you got to dial your joinery in a little bit. By the way, these make great gifts, and you can also sell them. You could call it for safety reasons. I also consider it for convenience purposes. I keep the pieces thick. What I mean is, instead of trying to mill down and work with small pieces like this, if you work with something a little more substantial, do all the joinery, do everything you need to, and then the last thing you do is rip that on the bandsaw to bring it down to that small finished piece. I think makes a lot more sense. So we take our business card and measure it first. And I believe these are 3.5 by 2. Yeah. So the inside has to be at least 3.5 by 2. However, there's something I'm going to tell you about that you're going to want to consider. I like to have the ends thicker than the sides, and the reason is it elongates what I would call the tail, and just makes it look a little more like a dovetail instead of a vegetable box, where typically box joints or finger joints are each piece is the exact same size. So if you go on to do that, then This is the option. So I'm going to keep my outside piece 3/8 of an inch in thickness. And I'm going to make these pieces 1/4 of an inch. Now for our length, that means we're going to have, if we take it right straight from the card instead of working off the box, so 3.5, and if we have a 3/8 inch piece and a 3/8 inch piece, that would put us at 4.25. I'm going to suggest we go, let's go 4 3/8 to be safe. So 4 3/8 is going to be our length. Now, I determined this 7/8 from the way I used to make it, and it's not the same method anymore, but I'm going to stick with it because personally I like the proportions. So this front and back are going to be 7/8 of an inch. And the finished piece is going to be 1/4, so I'm going to suggest you want to make them about 3/4, and that'll give you enough material to hold on to. So these are, we'll call these front and back. Now the ends, if we take it off of this dimension, we're going to have 2 inches. Our sides, or our front and back, are going to be 1/4. That would give us up to 2.5. However, the way I'm cutting this now on the table saw, we only have one setting on the height, and that's a little bit difficult to explain right now. You'll see it when we actually do it. But what I have to realize is that this depth that I cut here, I'm going to cut the same depth on this one. Obviously the ends of these pins are going to stick out beyond, but we have to take that into account in order to maintain the distance we have in here. So if we're going to make this cut 3/8, meaning this depth is going to be cut 3/8, then I've got to do the same thing here. So what I'm going to have to do is take the dimension of our card, I guess we measure right off here, which is 2 inches, and add 3/8 on either side. We're going to trim some off afterwards, but we have to factor that in now. So 2 3/4. I'm going to suggest that we go 2 7/8 for the length of our 2 ends. And our height, we want the top lid needs to be somewhere around 1/4 of an inch. So that would give us about 1 1/16 inches. So I'm going to say we're going to go start with about 1 1/8 inches. And then our thickness on this one is going to be 3/8 of an inch. So in order to get a piece that's going to be thick enough for us to split and have 3/8 of an inch, 2 3/8 of an inch inch pieces, I'm going to suggest we're going to want to probably have at least 7/8. 7/8 to 1 inch, we'll say 7/8. Cut them on the bandsaw will be okay. All right, a lot easier to work this piece in the full size. So first thing I'm going to do is clean up this. I'm going to check and make sure it's square. That looks good. I want that to be perfectly smooth. Where's my headgear? As long as your plane is set with a light pass, a light cut, and a really sharp blade, you should be able to get a perfect finish, even though that's figured wood. All right, check that one more time. Okay, that looks good. So now I can go and rip that. That's going to be ripped 4 3/8 by 7/8 by 3/4. Now this piece, we'll go over to the chop saw, and we need 2 7/8 on it. Okay, and this piece is going to be 2 7/8 by 1 1/8 by 7/8. I'm going to take that so I can see it. this piece is going to be 2 7/8 long by 1 1/8. By 1 1/8. Some more figure down on that end. I'll leave that a little heavy so that I can shoot it to final length. It's really critical that these pieces be square. So we'll get these done up. First thing I got to do is pull this away from the fence just a little bit. Cut a little chamfer. Now whenever I see that, I always worry that there's a slight blade slightly askew. That should be square across. And same thing still happening. A little more on the bottom. Try that again. Better. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, there's our two pieces. All right, for this jig, all you need is a cross-cut fence and a few small pieces of scrap. This is a piece of 1/2 inch MDF. I'm going to use this for what we might call a vertical zero clearance. So I'm going to make a cut here with the table saw blade, and that's what I've got to fit. So I'm going to take another piece of MDF. I'm going to square off the end first, and then I'm going to guess at what I think is going to be 1/8 of an inch. You might want to measure it, but I'm going to just guess on it. Now I'll clamp this piece in place, make my cut only part way. Now I got to get rid of this material in order to be able to test it, so I'll cut back some of this. Now we'll come over here, and that's so I've got to make that a little bit smaller. I'm just going to tap that over. Easiest way to make tiny adjustments. I don't think that's enough. We want a really sharp blade. There's not much supporting that little piece of MDF. Hard to believe that's still staying in place. Okay, I think that's it. Now to make it a little more precise, I'm going to go back in I'm not going to cut all the way off just for fear of that firing out of there. Break it off. Okay, that's snug, and I actually want it snug because that should make our joint a little bit tighter. All right, we're gonna save that. Now we'll get set up to cut this joint. Okay, I need to mark this so I know which is the face. And I chose that just because that's the one that's got the figure on it. And on this one, this is the face. I'm going to cut the pins first. Now this is completely an arbitrary setting. I'm going to use a couple of blocks of wood. Now I've squared these up. So that was shot on the shooting board, and this is square to it, and that is square to that as well. So I'm going to come in here. Now what I'm determining is going to be the bottom pin, how big it's going to be. I don't want it to be an 1/8. I need to be a little bit bigger than that, so I'm going to set it right there. I'm going to lock this in place. I really like these Bessie F clamps because they hold well and they don't slip and slide when you're trying to set them. Now I'm putting this clamp over here just to keep that vertical piece of MDF exactly where I want it. Now we've got to set the height of our blade as well. So remember, this needs to be set to the height that equals the thickness of our thicker end pieces, which are going to be 3/8. I'll just see if I've got a piece of scrap here that's, well, that's strong 5/16, so I'll guess off of that. I would say right about there. We've got to use this on both. So we'll hold this in place like so. I'm going to make this cut, flip it around and make the same cut on the opposite end. Remember, we're doing both at the same time. Make sure I've got my faces out. Having that vertical zero clearance piece, make sure that you get a nice clean cut back here. Now while that's in place, we need to come in and make our cuts in what would be our front and back. Now, can't do that. We have to move this over. What we want to do is we want to take away from this corner this piece right here. So we've got to match the thickness. So what we need to do is we need to move this over one saw blade. So I'm going to bring my other spacer block in. I didn't bring that piece of MDF over far enough. Loosen that. Take our spacer block. Slide that in and then lock that in place. Now we'll take our box front. Make sure we're cutting through the front side. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. Make sure it's standing plumb. Flip it over. And move it just a little bit to the left so I can cut off that piece. Now you have to make sure this is standing plumb when you cut that piece off, or else the bottom cut by the saw blade is not going to be nice and flat like you want it. Okay, next thing to do is come over and determine how wide we want that tail to be. So I'll take this off, save my little spacer. And you can do whatever you want on this. I'm gonna, actually, let's come in here and do a few measurements. So if our lid is going to be, well, actually we'll go from this side. We've made this about 3/32. So if we come down from the top, 1/4 of an inch for the lid, and then 3/32 for a pin that would be about the same size. That means we're going to cut to the right side of that second mark. So what that's going to do, it's going to allow us to have a pin this size on the top, and then our 1/4 inch lid, and this will be flush with the top of the lid. So I need to move this over. Nice thing about having a new sliding table is the slot is still relatively precise, created by that blade, so it's easy to know where you're going to be cutting. So make sure that's sitting right. Now we've got to remove all of this material, so we may as well do it now. Again, it's imperative that you keep that standing plumb so that that baseline that you're creating with the top of the cutting circle of the saw blade is nice and smooth. Okay, now we've got to cut a tail that's going to fit in that pin. So what we have to do is account for the fact that there's a saw kerf over there. So we need to move in that direction by 1 saw kerf. Make sure I'm doing this right. I always like to go in and just put it in roughly by pencil so I know approximately where I need to be. So as you can see, we need to get 1 saw kerf over. So I'll come in here, put my key in, lock this in place, loosen this, take the key out, move that over. Now, if we've done everything right, we should have a snug fit. That might be just a little bit too snug. And the problem is that we don't want to spread that piece on the bottom. So I need to take just a little more off of that, which means I've got to knock this whole thing to my left just slightly. I'm going to take this one off and just tap this. Now that's perfect. That's the kind of fit that I want because we'll be able to use cyanacrylate glue. Okay, our next move is to cut slots on both pieces to hold our bottom. And I'm going to use 1/8 inch Baltic birch plywood, which perfectly matches this cutter. So I'm just using a router table. That's an 1/8 inch bit. And I've got it up, because I'm using plywood, I don't have to worry about expansion. So I'm probably protruding up a little better than 1/16 of an inch. Now I've got to set my fence so that I can run my cutter right across here and not bump into either one of these. In fact, I can actually move it over a little bit. All right, that'll clear. So I'll do 2 passes, back twice just to clean it out nicely. And again, because you've got a full-size piece, it's a little more to hold on to. That's clean. Now make sure you're using the bottom, and I know that that's the bottom. This one, and I've drawn a line on my fence to show where the cutter is. So I've got to start somewhere around about here. I obviously don't want to go to the end, but I've got to go this direction far enough to account for the depth of the groove in the opposite piece. So I'm going to start my cutter right in the middle of that tail. If you need to, you can clamp a piece over here to support it. I just hold it firmly, drop it down, and stop at the same place on the other end. This is not a very big piece to hold on to, but it sure is easier than trying to hold on to that single side. Okay, we want that guide to be down, not only for safety, but the closer the guide is to the piece of wood you're cutting, the more control of the blade to prevent it from wandering one side or the other. So my first cut is going to be just a little bit better than 3/8 of an inch, and I say a little bit better just because I want to be able to clean that off. Now, your teeth on your bandsaw are set, each one to the opposite side. So I'm going to work with the tooth that is bent or set to my left, and make sure when I put that on there, it shows it's just a little bit proud of 3/8. Now I want something to safely push that through. I've got it right here actually. We're using the 2 outside pieces. Now, we need to reset that for 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to go just barely 1/4. Okay, there's our 4 pieces. Now we've got a route for the lid before we can assemble this, and we also have to cut out the bottom. But I'm going to look at the 2 and just see if I can tell which one has got a little more figure. Maybe this one. So I'm going to put this one on the back. So I'm going to route for the lid on the outside of the back piece. And the way I've got this core box bit, and we're going to do a video entirely on this, but I'm using a 1/4 inch core box bit that cuts a half round, and you have to make sure that it's a true half round in order for it to grab the dowel and hold it like you want. I've got part of it covered with my fence, And I also have its height set so that it's just below the halfway point. And again, we're going to go in and go cover this in great detail, but too long for this video. Now I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make a pass. I'm going to do several times. That'll prevents me from having to hog it all out at once. I'll have to plug it in first. We don't change that. We use the exact same setting for the... Okay, we'll check the depth of our groove. There's the 16th. It's almost 3/32. So what we're going to do then is measure from shoulder to shoulder. So from here to here, and then we've got to add, and sometimes it's easier just to do this, extend that out approximately the depth of the groove in the opposite piece, and then come over here and just do the same thing. And it would be safe to say 3 11/16, and that gives us a little bit of wiggle room. So our piece of our bottom needs to be 3 11/16, and then for the side, we'll do the same thing. Measure here, move this over the amount that it's going to go into the opposite piece, and then go over here, and I'm going to say 2 3/16. And again, that'll give us a little bit of wiggle room. I like the Baltic birch because it's what I would call a premium plywood. Easy to work with, and it's actually sized well. Now, we'll go over here and make sure that this is square. I may as well do it now. And we just have to make 2 cuts on the bandsaw. Okay. Again, I prefer the bandsaw when I can use it. It's just, I think it's safer. So 3 11/16. All right, we'll clean that up with some sandpaper. Get rid of that fuzz from the saw. Now, get a bench dog to lean against. All right, let's put the, oh, we got to clean that up on the inside. Get rid of those saw marks, or that pencil mark. Now this will change the dimensions slightly, but not much. I'll make sure we got a really fine setting. Makes a great eraser. Same thing on these, get rid of the pencil marks. Okay, now just before we glue it together, on this leading edge, I want to clean that up and also put a little chamfer. That's actually the bottom. This is the top. Make sure it's nice and clean. Just so that when you're reaching in, you're not reaching over at sharp edge. So I'm going to hold that on a bit of an angle and just cut a little chamfer. That's enough. And then when you close your lid, if you close against two square edges and there's any variation at all or shrinkage in the lid, it shows as a gap. But if you have a little chamfer on both sides and then you close it, that's hidden. So we'll do the same thing on this. Again, it's easier to do now than it is after. I think I've got to hold it up like this in order to do it. Want that to be even. And I'm going to take 1 or 2 passes off of this. And this is just to keep the lid from bottoming out or binding. This is on the inside. Okay, now we can put these together. Make sure our lid fits. Now, I'm thinking that lid, actually I call it a lid, but that bottom might be a little bit too long because it's not allowing this to close. Pull that one off. Just take a few passes. Now, check and make sure that everything is tight. So we can check it right here. Those 4 are all nice and snug, as are those. And then this is tight, that's tight, and that's tight. Last thing to do before we put glue on is check our diagonals to make sure that it's square. So if we set that in there, we'll use the 1/16 of an inch side. So inside corner to inside corner, we have 4 and a strong 1/16. 4 and a strong 1/16, so that's good. All right, now what we can do is use cyanacrylate glue, which is what's referred to as super glue for wood. And because the joint is nice and tight, this will wick, and we can just put a little bit in there. It's so much easier than trying to get regular glue in. We don't have to worry about it possibly gluing the bottom because, as I mentioned, that's plywood, so we know it's not going to swell and create a problem. And that'll wick in and around there, so you don't have to do anything more than that. You can squirt some accelerator on there if you want to set it up quicker, or you can just give it a few minutes and it'll set up on its own. Okay, glue is set up. I'm just going to go trim those ends off, and then we're going to make the dowel so you can see how we do the dowel hinge. So I will raise this up. Actually, I got to do it from out here. Now, if you've got a belt sander, we can trim that up, or at least bring it a little closer to being flush. Okay, that's not finished, but that's got it close. We'll save the actual finished part for once the entire thing is built. Now that's the piece of wood that we got the sides out of, so I'm going to use that same piece to cut the material that we're going to make our hinge out of. And the hinge is 1/4 inch in diameter, so I'm going to cut this a little bit stronger than 1/4 inch. I think I'll do it over on the bandsaw. We'll cut it about maybe a 32nd over. I'll do a couple of pieces just in case. That's a little bit big. The bigger it is, the more material we have to take off with the jig. There's a couple of things that we want to do with this before we actually put it in the jig. Oh, it's just a little bit short. I want to turn it into an octagon just so that we're not having to remove so much material. Hold that like so, and using a block plane, and we're just kind of holding the block plane so that it's level to the bench. Gonna have to guess on how much material we need to take off. You can do this on a table saw or the bandsaw. I find it's just as easy to do it like this. Now I want this to feed through the jig as evenly as possible, so in looking at that, it's actually pretty close, but I can probably go in and take off more material from each one of those corners. And again, that'll just make it a little easier to feed. All right, that looks pretty close. Now, we're gonna do a video on the jig and specifically on making dowels, But this is essentially what it is. This is a piece of lignin, which is a naturally oily wood. I've got a 1/4-inch hole drilled all the way through. I've got the hole, I've got an opening that's flared, and I've got a a bench plane blade in there that's set just right, so we'll produce a dowel out the other end that is exactly what we're looking for. So I'm going to clamp that onto the side of my bench, and then using a cordless drill to feed it through, hopefully we'll get the exact size dowel we want. Now I don't know whether one is going to hold that, so I better put another one on the other side. Now it helps if you start this off with a point. You can do it with a piece of sandpaper. You could also do it with you could possibly even do it with a plane. Like a pencil sharpener. And that'll get us started. So you want to feed this through at the appropriate rate. You can only tell that when you start cutting, and you want to feed it through so that it goes straight through that hole and you're not on an angle. I forgot. Sometimes we've got to keep those shavings from getting in there. Now I got to put this reverse. I mentioned the feed rate. If you're dealing with figured wood, which is what this is, you've got to go slow or else it gets really badly torn like it did out there in the beginning. But now I want to check this to see what we got for a diameter. I'd like to have it as close to being 0.25 as possible. All right, I'm going to check this. So that is 252. It's 250 down there. It's a little less than that, but that's really close. Now what I'm going to do, just to smooth it up a little bit, I'm going to squeeze it between a couple of sanding sponges. Do the other end as well. Now we'll check that. It's just under. That's good. And I want to see if it fits in the jig. It's snug, but it'll fit. That'll hold it perfectly so it won't go off center when we drill. I find the easiest way to do this, and maybe it's just because I've done so many of them this size, but I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, I've got 3.5 inches. I'm going to take my 2 middle pieces. So I always do it in odd numbers, and I like to fasten the 2 middle pieces to the lid and the smaller pieces on the bottom. The smaller pieces to the bottom. Don't ask me why, it's just the way I prefer to do it. So if in dividing this up into 5, if I use the top ones, or the middle sections at 1 inch each, that's what will be glued to the top. That leaves me approximately 1.5 inches, which divides into 3 real easily. So that means I'm going to have a 1/2 inch, and then a 1 inch, a 1/2 inch, a 1 inch, and a 1/2 inch. And as I've done on here, that's what it ends up looking like. I think it looks great. So we'll take, now I've made a jig, and again we'll cover this in greater detail in another video, but this is just a little bench hook, and I cut a 1/4 round groove in there, primarily so that when we saw the dowel, it acts as a 0 clearance. So I'm going to trim the end. So I'm pushing this in place so it's sitting firmly in that groove. I'm using my Joinery crosscut saw for two reasons. Number one, it's easy to control. Number two, it gives me a really clean cut and a very thin cut. So the less material I lose, the better it's going to be when I put the dowel back together, and you don't end up losing that the grain. So I'm going to take a pencil or a pen, whichever works best. First, I'm going to look at this and see if there's one side looks a little better than another. This shows a little bit better. You can see some of the figure. So I'm going to draw a line down the entire length. Now that's going to serve, so when I put this back together, I'll just connect the line and the grain will line up. Now I've gone in here and I've marked my 1/2 inch spot. Actually, I've used this a lot, so you can see there's lots of marks on here. But there's my 1/2 inch spot. So the first one I'm going to do is come in, set that for 1/2 inch. Now, I'm just going to go in and put a 1 on either side of the cut. So when I line it up, I know where I should be. And then we'll move this one over to the 1 inch mark. I don't need to label that one because I already have this one. And there's only going to be 2 1 inch pieces. So as long as we label both of those, that's enough. So I'll put 2 hash marks on either side of the cut on this one. And then this will be our second 1 inch piece. I'll leave the last one attached to this long piece of dowel. That way we can make it fit exactly, and it's a little easier to hold on to. Now, somewhere here I have a pair of pliers. You'll see how I need those. Here's my dovetail jig, my wood hinge drill jig. So I've got a 1/16 inch drill bit in there, and there's the 1/4 inch collar that just screws on. Now I've got this sticking out quite far, but that's because I've got a very short section of dowel, and I've got to be able to drill into that at least 1/8 of an inch. So I'll put this in my drill. That's the middle piece. Keep these in order. So I only need to drill one side of this. Sometimes if you just lick your finger, you can get a little better grip on this. Now I need my pliers. Okay, so there's my perfectly centered 1/16 inch diameter hole. Just approach that slowly so it'll allow it to stay on center. You don't want that drill to wander at all. And then our last section. Okay. Now I'm using 1/16 inch welding rod. Don't need a piece quite that long. Now, nice thing about this, it's hard enough that when you pinch it, it doesn't mushroom. If it mushrooms, then it's going to ruin the hole when you put it in. And I find it easier to just put the dowel, the pin, in the big sections. Then you don't end up going to put this together and finding out that you stuck a pin in both pieces when you should only have it in one. So I'll insert that, bottom it out. And I don't need a lot, maybe 3/32 of an inch. Having those holes perfectly on center is the secret to having this work. If they're off center at all, when you operate the lid, you're going to put a lot of stress on it and something's going to give. All right, now see if we can connect it and see how well it fits. So there's the one and the one. Also want to make sure that it doesn't bottom out. That's okay. Make sure there's no sawing debris in there. That's good. Remember, the less material we have to take off or we lose when we separate that, the better it is, and the better the grain is going to line up. Okay, now this part, we need to cut that dowel to fit. We want it actually to be a little bit tight. So what I do is push it firmly against this side, keep it out near the end, and you want to be careful because you're taking a chisel and you don't want to end up stabbing yourself. What I'm going to do is just lay the chisel flat against the inside edge of the box, and then just carefully, without too much movement, you can see how close my hand is, make a mark on there. It's hard to see, but I'll put an arrow at it so when I get to the bench hook, I'll be able to find it. Now put that in place. And you really don't want to have to do this twice. Meaning the first cut needs to be the one and only. Okay, see how that fits? Make sure that you don't have any of this thin little feather of wood preventing that dowel from sitting in that groove properly. Now the reason I like that to be tight is I like a little bit, I like enough friction when you open the lid that it'll hold it open and it doesn't fall shut. And it also pulls those tight, so you have a better chance of having that dowel be completely concealed. Okay, while I'm here, I'm going to go in, I'm going to mark the joint lines. And we'll remove that. Now, I'm going to put a W to stand for wax. So I'm going to wax this section, I'm going to wax this section. And the reason we wax is we don't want excuse me, we don't want to get glue or allow glue to squeeze over into the opposite section. When we put this together, the one part is glued to the base, the second part is glued to the lid. And there's always a risk that when you place it in there that some of that glue is going to squeeze over. And if it does, you run the risk of it seizing your hinge. So right on that joint line, I'm putting a piece of tape. Just use the eraser on a pencil to place that firmly. Now I'll just bend those down to get them out of the way. Now, any paste wax will do. And I'm going to use, again, the eraser to go in there and just apply enough wax so that should some glue spill over, it won't adhere. Of course, the tape prevents the glue from getting on the part that I do want to adhere. Now, when we do the lid, we'll do the exact opposite. Where we glue on one side, we wax in the opposite. I don't know where this coloring came from off of that eraser. I save all my scraps. These are some offcuts of some bird's eye. This is small bird's eyes. This is for other large bird's eyes. So you just have to decide which you're going to want. And I think I'm going to use this piece. Now look at this closely. It's rough sawn, so it's a little bit hard to see, but I like this cluster down here, and I've got the thickness that I need. So I'm just going to rough it out. Make sure that's wide enough. I'll stay outside the lines. And we need to get that flat, and there's a couple ways to do it. You can do it on a disc sander or belt sander, or you can do it with a hand plane. I'm going to go over to my disc sander. It's a nice fast way, but it's very small, so you got to be careful the way you hold it. Because this was cut on the side of a thicker piece, it's got quite a bit of a cup in it. So if you were to plane that, it's not difficult, but it's going to take you a little bit of time. I can lay that on that disc sander and do that up pretty quick. So I just hold it, my fingers, the disc is spinning this way, and I'm going to work on the top side. And I move it up and down just in case there's a dull spot on the disc. It won't interfere with me getting this as flat as I need. Okay, so all the mill marks are off. Now we can go over. Now I want to finish that before I start fitting it. So I'll just hand plane that, get rid of those marks. Pull that blade in a little bit. Okay, that feels nice and smooth. Now I need that to lay flat. Seems to have a high corner. Okay, nice thing about a hand plane is I can put a finish right on that and I'm done. But our next step is to get that to fit perfectly in the box. And I'll show you what I mean by perfectly. Now I'm going to use my shooting board for this entire procedure. You want your blade nice and sharp because you're going to be planing the end grain of that piece of maple. Get that blade parallel to the sole. First thing I need to do is plane a straight edge so that I can rest it against the fence. So all I'm doing is pushing the piece of wood against the sole of the plane so that it makes contact over the entire surface. Now, that's on a bit of an angle, so I've got to pull it away. Cut a fairly heavy chamfer on this end. Flip it over, still have to cut some more. I don't want any tear out here. Now I still don't have enough of a chamfer here in order to get rid of this gap, so. That should do it. Now I've got a bit of a nick in the blade, but rather than stop to sharpen, what I'll do is just raise that up above where the nick is. And what have I got? Let me grab a piece of 1/2 inch MDF. All right, that's nice and clean. All right, now I'm going to take this, put it tight against that side. We'll deal with this and this surface later, but right now we've got to get these two to fit perfectly down in there without any slop at all. This is where you want to strive to get that beautiful fit. Now I'm going to do this mostly by just trial and error, but I want to be able to get close. So I'll mark that. I've got to cut quite a bit of a chamfer to get all the way down to that line. Shoot, I was cutting off of that side and I shouldn't have been. That's not a reliable edge. Oh, I hope I didn't go too low. No, I didn't. What I need to do now is go over to the table saw and make this side parallel to that side so that I can plane against that side. That would have been a fatal move had I not caught it in time. See how far that was off? Hopefully we've got enough to save it. No, not yet. Just enough. At this stage, I'm going to go one pass and check. Doesn't quite fit down in. Almost. Okay, I've got to cut my chamfer here one more time. That should be it. Yep. Okay, no slop, just fits in perfectly. And these two pieces are parallel to each other. That's the reason why you can do it on the shooting board like I did. Okay, so now our next move is to make this back edge perfectly flush with these two ends. That's one of the reasons why we need to go over to the sander earlier and flush that up. We'll see how far off we are. Okay, it's sticking out a little bit more here. It's flush here, sticking out a little bit here. So I've got to come in and remove some material. So what I'll do is I'll start with the blade right about here, make a pass, keep coming back a little more each time. You should be able to feel within about 1/1000th of an inch with your fingers. So, okay, so that's right on. But I don't think I went all the way. And as I look at that, it's kind of torn. So I'm going to back the blade off some. And what I need to do is make sure I make complete passes, meaning the blade has to cut from one end to the other in order to keep that where I want it. Okay, that's flush. That's not, so I'm going to take off a little bit more. So it's this one that's going to leave a little. Okay, that's flush. Now what we're going to do is make this cut, exact same setting, only this time we're going to lay this piece flat as opposed to the way we did this one where we held it up on its edge. Now, before we mark this out, we're going to go in and spray the inside. We want that lid to be as stable as possible, so you can't spray the outside and leave the inside because that's just asking for trouble. So I'll put a piece of masking tape on there to protect that surface from being sprayed, which would affect the glue. And then I'm just going to go in there and slice that masking tape carefully. And I need to do it on the end as well because I've got to be able to spray. Along here. Backside doesn't matter, that'll be finished when we spray the rest of it. I'm going to get the edges. Now we'll put 3 coats, doesn't take long to dry, and sometimes it's just a matter of rubbing it with my palm is all you need in order to take off any little bumps from the finish. but 3 coats, and that'll give me enough of a finish and protection to help stabilize that lid. Now that that's dry, we can take that off, and I'm going to transfer the marks right off of this base piece. And because they're 1 inch wide, it's the width of my tape. Get this done a little quicker. I've been doing it like this for a long time, and this is the first time I've actually had pink from the eraser stain that. I'm going to have to find a new pencil supplier. Okay, now this is ready to glue in. We want to make sure that our lines, or our line, lines up. See which way we did this. It was that way. I would like that to have lined up a little bit better. I'm going to go with it, but ideally it would be more like this one and this one. We'll see what happens. Now when we put that in place, we have to glue this and we have to glue that. Then we'll set this in place. We want to make sure that the line is facing out so it'll be removed. And we may as well grab the clamps right now that we're going to use. I prefer to use these quick clamps, or quick grip, just because they don't apply a ton of pressure and I don't want a whole lot. Now, I need something on the bottom that we can clamp against. I'll use this block. And then I'll put 1 clamp here and 1 clamp there. Now, I like tight bond 3, and I'm going to use a toothpick to apply it so I can get it exactly where I want it. You don't want to use, you have to use enough, but you don't want to use too much. The glue is there to help prevent anything from interfering, but you don't want to go too much. So what we'll do is we'll do the bottom, we'll put the dowel in place, then we'll do the top and add it in. I always like to make sure I get plenty of glue on that outside part. That'll give you a better look where the dowel meets the base. I actually prefer to stay away from that line. Now I'm going to come back and take some of that glue off because that's a little bit too much. I got to wipe it on. Okay, mark is on the outside. Put that in place. Oh, you know, that is a little bit too tight. Well, it's a tough thing to try to do, to take some of that off, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to. Got to work quick. That glue's drying. Actually, maybe I can shoot it. Now I'm going to put the inside and cut a little chamfer. I wasn't planning on this. See if that was enough. Yep. And force that down into the groove. Clamp will put the appropriate amount of pressure on there when we get it in place. Oh, I almost put it in the wrong spot. Shoot. I put that on there and then I forgot to put the wax on. Hard to believe I've done this many times. I hope that red stain doesn't show. Put some glue on there before I put it together. Again, make sure you get the outside edge. Now put that piece on the bottom. You got to put enough pressure for that round groove in the lid to position that dowel exactly where you want it. We got some squeeze out, so that's good. Now we'll give that about 25 minutes to set, and then we can flush it off, and we'll be just about done. Okay, that's been in the clamps for over half an hour. Take that out. Now we can do this a couple of ways. You can do table saw, we can do band saw. I'm going to plane off the back excess portion of the hinge. Just until I get close, because I don't want to hit. I don't want to hit the side because I don't want to break off the end of the walnut. I'll pull the blade in a little bit. And we'll clean up the front. Make sure that's not tearing. I'm pulling that blade in just so that I'm taking off less with each pass, so I can kind of sneak up on that again. If I happen to hit that, it's going to break some of those fibers out. Okay, now I prefer to use the bandsaw on this, so we'll go over and trim that off. taking a little bit more. Now we either have to plane that or sand it. And I'm going to try planing it to get it close. But to protect this, I'm going to come in with my block plane and I'm going to cut a little chamfer on there. I think maybe this way. Actually, I think I'll put a couple of pieces in there just so that the pressure is not in the middle of the box. Now my bandsaw went quite deep right there, so I've got a fair bit of material to remove. I've got to watch that chamfer over here to make sure it's deep enough. I'm going to put a little wax on there to cut the friction. I also want to make sure that we're taking the same amount of material so we don't end up introducing a taper. Okay, that's better. And that's still, yeah, I've got a little bit of a, no, maybe not. Okay, I'm going to go over to the belt sander. I've got a 150 grit disc band on, or belt on there right now. And that'll allow me to get it close, and then we'll switch it and put a 320 on to finish it. I flip it around like this because the pressure, when you're using a belt sander, it wants to wear on this side more than the back one. So by flipping it around, I just hopefully even that out. And I also like to move it up and down just so that you're not working or if you have a dull spot on the blade, on the belt, it doesn't end up showing up on your work. The last thing I'm going to do is cut a chamfer all the way around. You want to be careful that you don't break out these ends, so I always skew the plane a little bit and make sure you're going the right way so that you get a nice smooth cut. Might be better this way. It is. You could do this on the belt sander too. I just find it a little easier to control with the hand plane. That's tearing, so I got to go this way. And then the same thing on the top. It's torn. Smoother. And a little chamfer on the inside. There you go. Okay, the last thing we do with that is finish it. And we're going to leave a link below on finishing small boxes. A couple of things to help you with when it comes to that. But I would sign that on the bottom, and it makes a beautiful gift. It'll really show up nice too when the finish goes on it. Wood Hinge Business Card Box. Oh, you should make sure it fits. Beautiful. Hi, if you like my work, if you like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. And I've always said better tools make it a whole lot easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools, and also talk to you about our online and in-person workshops. Good luck in your woodwork.